Welcome to City Conversations. Today we have with us Gerald Newton, who is the Director of Development Services. During a particularly exciting time in our city, as we've seen the growth of a new Class A baseball stadium right next door to us in downtown, coupled with the Prince Charles Hotel, the building of the Hyatt Regency, the creation of the Freedom Town Center, a lot of things going on in the city, and Jerry's department is responsible for making sure that all of that works together. So welcome, Jerry.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And we really appreciate the opportunity for you to be here today. So before we start talking about what you do, tell me a little bit about your background and what lends itself, or how your background lends itself to helping you in the new role as the Development Services Director.
Sure. Again, I actually like that intro because it talked a lot with images of what our office is all about. My background really began about 35 years ago. I've been married 35 years, and I've been a professional planner and also in the development field all those 35 years. Actually, a few years before, I started in the Poconos doing recreation planning in Pennsylvania, and then I became a planning director early in Kentucky, looking at the growth around an airport, Cincinnati International Airport, northern Kentucky, and all the activities there. Was recruited over to Cabarrus County to become their planning and development director when they had a lot of growth and activity occurring.
So you started up north and you moved south.
Yeah, I started and worked some great work habits growing up Pennsylvania Dutch area of the community. From there, went up into Ohio, spent a number of years. I've also worked private sector and worked for others as well as for myself, designing, building, developing subdivisions and communities.
So it sounds like you bring with you a wealth of knowledge. You've been here for how long now?
It's been a year and a half.
Holy cow, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
It seems like it's been shorter. It certainly has flown by. And you've got a staff of about 50 folks. So tell me a little bit about the department itself, what you do and how you do it from an organizational perspective.
Sure. I have 50 great planners, inspectors, code enforcement officers, administrators, taking care of a whole bunch of activities that we handle in the city. So our office operates, if you think of it in terms of what's going to happen in a city and what's happening in the city now, those are the types of things that our office is involved in. So we have planning and zoning and all the activities that we'll talk about and see some videos on later. We have inspections, code enforcement, which really is looking at activities that now are under construction, and after they're under construction, making sure that our city remains beautiful and getting it better all the time.
And I was going to ask you, why is your department important? And I think you hit the nail on the head right there, to make sure that we maintain the beauty of our city.
And to make it better. Almost every place will say, hey, we can do better. And Fayetteville's not an exception. As we look in the past, which is important for our department to understand the past, present, and to represent the future interests. Almost every place in this country says we can always do better. Fayetteville is not an exception, and we're able to work with the community, with the residents, with those future businesses coming in, as well as those that are already here, as to how to make the place better.
And I know just in the time you've been here, we've seen some amazing growth. Just in the downtown, I'm sure we're going to talk about the baseball stadium, because that certainly is something that we wanted to share with people.
Right.
But the baseball stadium has been a huge thing, I know, on your plate.
That's correct. That's a project that actually was almost a full building constructed that no one ever saw under the ground in terms of all that had to be reviewed. One of the activities that we deal with is one of looking at what a building is going to look like in what's called plan review. So that location that we see on the screen now, that's the place where the baseball stadium is now in place and being constructed. So we started that project by looking at all the plans underneath as well as every activity on top of it. Our inspectors now are weekly, almost daily, going through and doing the different inspections and meeting weekly with the contractors to identify any issues and to resolve problems before they become too big.
Sure, just to make sure, I'm sure that code is enforced and that the things are safe.
Right.
As we see here from the ground side many months ago now, what they were doing down below the surface, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So that's of the stadium. The area of the parking garage is one where they built a whole structure underneath, and making sure that that structure was going to be super safe for every vehicle going on, all the people walking in it, by it, and that it would never change any of its design or structure. became very important, and it took months of work with everybody involved in the design to actually start the construction. So by the time construction starts, depending on the size of a project, it could take a month, it could take a year in working with people in our office on the design and approval process.
So you mentioned the parking garage. So right next door to it, of course, we have the parking garage and we have the Prince Charles Hotel. A different structure in the sense that it was already there. They had to gut the entire thing, get it down to the I-beam and the concrete structure on the inside, and then really build up inside, and which I know you've also been involved with.
Yeah, and so the Prince Charles Hotel is a really interesting project. It's one that people don't recognize, again, the involvement that our office has. It began with this being a spot that was eligible for some tax credits in it being a historic structure. That's an activity that our office is involved in. Then we are involved in all the review of taking an old structure and making it safe, not with all the new codes, but most of the new codes, which involves quite a bit of interesting insight as to how you develop. That's where being a general contractor in this state has helped me and helped the folks who are doing the inspections. We have guys who do inspections who have actually been putting their hands in boots on all these types of things over the past years. The great activities of our office show up when people don't realize what a project looked like before, and it looks really good afterwards,
right,
as we just saw in that one.
It's certainly going to look fantastic when it's done, and the good news is here it'll be open in April so that people will be able to enjoy both the baseball stadium and the Prince Charles Hotel itself.
Right.
And that, remind me again of when the Hyatt and the parking garage will be completed. That's still a little ways out.
Parking garage is a couple months after all that. And we may be looking at the end of March to be able to get what's called a temporary commercial occupancy on the first part of Prince Charles.
Okay, well that's fantastic. It's going to be a huge effort, I think, to helping revitalize the downtown. And so we're not focused just on that downtown area. I think another great example of where you all have been involved is the Freedom Town Center. And so another new shopping area that's opened up here in the not too distant past.
And that's a good point. Our office is involved in every acre of the city, in all the activities. So Freedom Town Center and the activities that have occurred there are an example of a project that has occurred with our office coordinating with a lot of other departments and the development community as to how can you make a site get redeveloped into something where it's attractive, businesses want to locate, and the residents want to come, customers make those businesses thrive. So that's one where our coordination with DOT and departments, stormwater issues on that site all come into play.
And it certainly is a beautiful setup over there. And as we see in the back here, Home Goods, we've never had one of those here before. We were just seeing before that Five Below, and I think Sprouts is just down the road from that. So certainly bringing new things to this area that rather than having to drive to Raleigh, residents can get and people from the surrounding communities can get right here downtown Fayetteville.
That's a good point. Not only are they not having to drive, but they're going to a place that they've already been familiar with. It had one use, and now they've seen it transformed into something else.
Right. And to your point as well, I remember when that still used to be, a trailer park, I think, before that.
That's what I understand.
Yeah, so it's a huge difference from then until what it is now. So talk a little bit about, from a permitting side, what types of permits people need to get when they're building something like this, or when they're doing things around their own home, or a construction person is coming in to build a home, how that works. Because I know permitting, whether it's in that commercial field or whether it's in the residential field, is certainly important for your team.
Yeah, and there are a lot of different permits. Generally, the public, the residents, don't have to worry about the permits. It's the people who are doing the development construction that we were looking at a few minutes ago that are doing those things. So the permits that we customarily think of, somebody will come in and say, I'm going to start a new project. Depending on where they are in that starting of a new project, they pull various permits. Those can be from plan reviews, or which are horizontal type of activities, or they can be vertical activities of building construction. Those are the ones that most people recognize and think of when you say, I need to get a permit. But there are other permits that are a little different that most people wouldn't think of that our office is involved in. As an example, we issue taxi permits. And that ensures that the taxis driving around our city have been inspected, and the drivers of those taxis are passing all the backgrounds and reputable, so that the people getting in those vehicles know that they're going to be safe. Another one, for those who love to yard sale, they probably already know this, but most people don't realize that you get a permit for yard sales in the city.
And what's the reason behind that? I know the answer, but please share it with our audience.
Sure. Well, there are some people who'd like to have a 365-day yard sale. And the city has determined years ago that they didn't want to do that, which is kind of an interesting way to bring in zoning. The city has had zoning in place since 1961. And over the years, they look at things and say, how do we want the place to develop? The idea of the permits help implement some of those things that they're saying, this is how we want the city to develop. And it's not what the thought was only that year, but it adjusts over time.
Sure. And so speaking of permits and making sure that things stay the same or help keep the city looking beautiful, what we were talking about earlier with the Freedom Town Center, and let's move forward into the Unified Development Ordinance, what does that do to help set guidelines for the city and for the folks that are constructing buildings across the city?
Okay, sure. 1961, zoning ordinance. A little bit later, subdivision ordinance. A little bit later, floodplain regulations. Each coordinates with each other, but they were never combined into one document. 50 years later, in 2011, those three documents, subdivision regulations, zoning, floodplain, were combined into one. So our Unified Development Ordinance doesn't encompass every part of the regulations that occur within a city, but they do provide a way for us to look at old projects, redevelopment of projects, new projects. We have an example right here of how we were able to take Tallywood in a super neat design that they have on that front, something that people recognize, and put in place some of the regulations, the standards that the community has said for itself. These are the types of things that we want our community to look like. So you're seeing examples of landscaping, trees, you're seeing the fronts of buildings that have a little bit more design than they, in the past, had occurred in the city.
And that's the same here, I guess, with the mall, Cross Creek Mall. That whole front end was completely redeveloped.
Cross Creek Mall, we've actually, you're looking now at part of that, but Sears across the nation is in trouble, and a determination was made by the location of our Sears at the mall that they're going to be tearing that down. So that's one of the activities that we're working with now. They're getting ready to demolish the two-story Sears and put in that place another business and create some out parcels or pads for other, just like what we saw there, which will be restaurants and a couple other retail activities. So something, again, that has been central to our community for a long time. I think the mall came in at '76. It will still have its identity, and it can continue to move as the economy dictates. That's probably an interesting way for me to say, what we do in our department is we work with the development community, we work with the residents, the leaders, the future people coming in, so that our city can continue to grow and move and be prominent in the activities that go on in a whole region.
And you mentioned something about the living, breathing part of this document, I think before we were talking, but from a UDO perspective, I know there is some consternation by some across the community that sometimes it's too restrictive and sometimes it might hit areas that they might not feel are helpful to them as builders, as retailers, whatever. Tell us a little bit about how that document does change.
Sure. And part of my background as a developer, a person who's designed and worked for, hired by cities as well as developers and property owners, I've been involved in development in 30 states. The regulations that we have in place that were already here, started in 2011 here, are very similar to what I've been used to in communities that are wanting to make a statement of we want business and we want our existing business to thrive. There are times that we find And I find in myself items in our regulations that, like, why is that there? Can someone give me the background? How did that get there? That's part of what we want to make sure, that we don't just put a regulation in place that doesn't have a meaning. And from time to time, there are need to change those. So every year, and it's actually twice a year, staff will work on making some revisions to our Unified Development Ordinance to improve it. Is everybody always happy on it? No. But in a general sense, do people recognize the value of it? Yes. Does our development community recognize it? Yes. Can we do better? Sure. And that's, again, going back to that earlier statement, we want to continue to make our community better, whatever better ends up meaning.
Sure. And I think that's fair. When you look at communities like Raleigh or Durham or others around here, some of the larger cities that are a little bit bigger than us as the 6th largest city in the state, that they've got things like that in place. And it certainly has helped them from a development perspective to maintain or improve what they look like from an outward-facing perspective.
Right. And to your point on that, 6th largest in the city, in the state, but we're not on 40, we're not on Interstate 85, we're off of 95, we're in a whole different area. And we don't have some of the automatic benefits of those other areas of high growth. So we work with Fort Bragg and need to continue to strengthen that relation. And we work to establish that Fayetteville is a strong community, not just as a city, but all the area around it.
Sure. And you mentioned the interstate, and so I know we had this discussion several weeks or a month ago now with some folks who were looking at the development of our area when it's affected or how it's affected by 295. What do you see from a growth perspective, how that's going to change what our city looks like next year, 2 years, 10 years down the road?
Well, it's a great question, and I think you're kind of hitting also to this idea of what's the city's vision. What does the city want to be? For 200 years, it's pretty much been, if I can use the palm of my hand, I'm not sure if that's going to work. Yeah. So we're used to the idea of looking at the downtown, and then we have all these roads radiating out, and we think from the downtown and radiate out. We're getting ready to knit, almost like a baseball glove, we're getting ready to knit 295 all around it. People are going to start coming in this direction. So the growth in the activities, or the catalyst activity that we're doing in the downtown, the synergy that creates, what occurs there, we have to make sure that we don't mess up in the downtown and let the development community be able to prosper there. These areas have not been having much attention at all. So we have, in one of the areas that we work, long-term planning, I have my planners, many of whom have been planning directors of in other states, in other parts in North Carolina, having them work on each of those interchanges, meet with the residents, meet with the businesses, talk with the community about how that area should look, and begin to put together just the beginning of what should each of those nodes, those new areas, look like. And if you've gone around, and I think as you've alluded to, whether it's Raleigh or Charlotte, you can see what a loop going around the city does to change the whole fabric of a community.
Well, absolutely, and I remember sitting in some of those briefings 3 weeks or a month ago when we were listening to the impact of what 295 is going to do just for the Murchison Road area,
yeah,
which is certainly one of our council's priorities right now, is how do we positively affect that area for change. And as you look at that feeder road right into our downtown, so backing off of that,
absolutely,
what happens up at the interchange of 295 and how does that move through, whether it's Murchison Road, whether it's Cliffdale,
yeah,
but there's a lot of changes coming.
Not only good changes coming, but we need to be sure that we understand some of those changes. And that's an example of how we worked with Fort Bragg 96th Civil Affairs and had some of their expertise. You know, Kevin, as you well know, they go around the globe helping communities. We have them right here in our city, and they offered to do some help. We loved partnering with them to be able to get some of their expertise with some of our planners, and just to begin to put the thoughts together. It doesn't mean that the planners have it. And that's one of the things that's maybe not understood enough. In the work of professional planning, we're not regulators, we're planners, we're thinkers, and we work with the community itself to look at what's here now and what the future should be. But it's not a clear picture. We can't say exactly what it's going to be, right?
Right.
But we can help the community look to those and really study and spend time on it. That's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've certainly got your hands full as you work to move our city forward and help plan that. I think, and too, from a planning perspective, I know we had one of the videos we were looking at before we started our show here was some of the community meetings that you have that help as we plan and move forward to get the involvement of residents. Tell me a little bit about that in terms of what you seek from residents, from builders, from others in the community as we help move the city forward.
Well, as I mentioned up front, there's about 50 people in the office. Every one of them gets to hear from the community all the time. But there are times that we really focus in on a certain area. One of those right now is making sure that we have taken old documents that have been done and look at, okay, now that we have really strong activities happening in the downtown, how are we going to gather input, gain input? Let's bring in some consultants from other communities who have done the same type of work, as well as the local knowledge, that knowledge of those who have been here for years, who've developed it, who understand it, who want to see a great future. Let's work with them and put together a plan. So in just a couple weeks, in March, we'll be presenting a discussion of what we have put together for a downtown development plan. It's a great document. Depending on how often when people see this, it will be before or after that. But that is an example of a long-term plan, a long-term vision of what a part of the city can look like.
You know, and it's great that you're getting that involvement from the community, because I think that's vitally important. We want to make sure that we've got their buy-in, that we've got their ideas, the experience that they've got, that we can harness as we help move forward.
Yeah, so anybody who comes into a community, whether it's a planning director who's only been here 18 months, or a consultant who is going to be in and gone in a few weeks, or a short period of time, who says, I can give you all the answers, is not someone who you should be listening to. You need to listen to your community.
And one of the last things I'd like to cover before we close here is the movement forward from a technology perspective. I know you guys launched a great portal here in the not too distant past that helps builders submit things online. So we move forward there too, which is how do we make it easier for people to submit things? They're not having to walk into City Hall with their plans and present them to somebody and do all of that work. Tell me a little bit about that online portal.
Sure.
And what it does for you.
Yeah, it's just as you described. It allows a person to not have the paper in hand and bring a set of plans, run 5 sets, 10 sets, so everybody can look at it and we can talk together. Instead, it allows us to put a big monitor up and work with the development community, the builders, or those who are developing a site. They submit it online and we can begin the process. Our office coordinates with a lot of different agencies and looking at how that works. And I think you've shared or will share a little bit of what that looks like. It is live now for plan reviews, site plan work, and it's also going live in about, in 2 to 3 weeks. Builders will be bringing it in on a regular basis electronically. This, by the way, is similar to the other work that I do, where I work as an adjunct professor, where I get to talk to people all around the globe in leadership, and we're using the technology. Anybody who's looked and listened, technology is very quickly changing the way things are done. Fayetteville is staying on the leading edge of that and making sure that not just our office, but the city as a whole is embracing the technology, not being shy and afraid of it, but using that so that those who want to use those types of things, who are coming from other parts of the state or country, can actually benefit from the quicker activities, the quicker responses, and better activity control.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing the next step with this development portal. And speaking of technology, I know one other thing we wanted to mention too, so if folks want to report a violation for code or for other things across the city, we talked about Fix-It. How does that help you and help your folks that are enforcing violations?
Yeah, one of the divisions we really didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about is code enforcement. They deal with over 14,000 code issues a year. So 10 people canvassing all of the city, all types of code issues. They can't see it all. The residents, the businesses can say, something's not right with that. Or there's a lot of trash and debris on that property. Or they're not maintaining their business or their yard or their sign, or they've pulled in a trailer and someone's now living in a RV trailer on this site, or someone's in a car and we're not so certain what it is and we're not comfortable talking to them. So the city has put in where you can call, or you put it on Fix-It. It comes immediately to our office. It's put in the queue of activities, and the inspectors will go and handle it, usually the same day.
That's a lot of violations. And of course, we've got 210,000 residents, so there's a lot of people that that help have those issues. But what are some of the more common ones that you run across?
Yeah,
Tell me like your top 3 or 4.
And unfortunately, that is a lot of violations. There's about 73,000 parcels in this city also. So if you think of it that way, roughly 20% have some kind of issues going on. They tend to be people neglecting their property. So whether it's the house is in some state of disrepair, or the yard is getting taller, grass is getting higher, trees have fallen and not taken care of. Those, unfortunately, are all the items that hit that big first swath of activities. Now, should the city be the one always having to deal with that? No. We're seeing homeowners associations, we're seeing neighborhood watch centers beginning to help in that activity.
Sure.
Because government can't be dealing with all those things. It is a role that we have, but it's also one of, is the community, is that area, are they showing and representing pride in their own locations?
So it really is a team effort. Besides the 10 people you have out doing that, really, if we want them to report something that they think is a violation, either Fix-It or calling 4331-FAY, which is our call center,
Yes.
to let people know that there's a violation
That's right.
out there. Well, Jerry, thanks so much for joining us today. You've certainly got your hands full with 50 staff to work with you and help move our city forward. But between planning, code enforcement, zoning, all of the other things that you do, whether it's the baseball stadium downtown, whether it's the Freedom Town Center, or helping folks make sure that they keep their yards up, every bit of that is important. So we really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing to work together with you to help improve our city.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and also for what you do in sharing the message of what our office and the other offices of the city do. It's a great place to be. If people haven't visited and decide they're going to move here, we hear the story over and over how people who came here, whether it was military that brought them, come back. We want to continue to encourage that and do all that we can. And it is not a sole effort. Nothing that I'm just talked about is possible without the 50-plus great people working in my office.
Absolutely.
So thank you again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us today.